Hello, everyone, and thank you all for joining us for the virtual Skilled Nursing News Staffing Summit today. My name is Alex Zorn, and I'm a healthcare reporter with Skilled Nursing News, and I'll be moderating this session, 100 Days of Employee Retention, the most critical period to combat workforce shortages. Before we begin, I want to thank our thought leadership sponsors, Point Click Care, OnShift, Care, Pinnacle Quality Insight, and to our awareness sponsor, WorkSync. We welcome questions from the audience at any time. Please submit them via the Q&A function in Zoom, and we'll get to those at the end of the presentation. Now I'd like to turn it over to Chris Magleby, CEO of Pinnacle, for our presentation today.
Great, thanks, Alex. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate Skilled Nursing News putting this event on and having us. This is kind of a really important topic. And I'm sure most of you are dealing with staffing issues. It seems to be the #1 issue that facing our sector right now. So I want to talk today a little bit about employee retention and some strategies that you can employ to improve your employee retention. But I've got a lot of data. It's kind of some interesting data that supports some of the stuff that I'm talking about, and also gives some insight into what's happening in skilled nursing right now. So like Alex said, I'm the CEO of Pinnacle QI. We provide customer and employee insight platforms to senior living and post-acute care providers. We have a product called Retain that helps operators retain their workforce, and this product connects directly to either a payroll system or an HR system. And when we interact with the employees through those systems. So the data that I'm presenting today comes from data that we've pulled from these payroll and HRIS systems. We have data for over 300,000 employees in this sector, which is a huge sample size. There's about 1.3 million workers in the skilled nursing sector right now. So we have a pretty big sample size of what's going on with that. And so we've got some really cool data. The first data point that I'm going to talk about is resident satisfaction, because we also measure resident satisfaction and family satisfaction. We have some interesting data. So I want to show you this this graph and talk about why it's important. So this shows satisfaction levels for long-term care, short-term SNF, and then assisted living and independent living over the last 4 years. And the first thing that I'll point out is most of these levels are pretty high. They're around 90%. You can see assisted living numbers of around 90%. Long-term SNF is just under 90%. And so the first thing I want to point out is that in long-term post-acute care and senior living and senior care, we've generally had high resident satisfaction levels, and those levels continue to be high. We've definitely faced some challenges through the pandemic, and I kind of want to talk about that. So one of the things that's interesting is those top 3 lines are long-term SNF, assisted living, independent living, and you see those numbers kind of mirror each other over time. And the first change that you see is an inflection point that kind of goes up. And what that is, that was the start of the pandemic. And that was really kind of interesting because we saw resident satisfaction really increase during the start of the pandemic. And that was due to how grateful residents and their family members were to you and to your staff members for how you were taking care of them. And it was a very scary time. It was, seniors were at a high risk population, and they felt a lot of gratitude. And so you saw that reflected in the resident satisfaction levels, and that was kind of interesting. Then as the pandemic kind of wore on, and you had some of the visitation restrictions, you have other problems coming in, you did see the satisfaction levels start to come back down to where they were previous or slightly below. And then you saw something else happen that was a little interesting. Let's see. Around Q2 of 2021, you started to see independent living kind of separate itself from assisted living and from SNFs. And that's kind of an interesting piece of data because one of the things that started to happen around that time in 2021 was we started to really feel the effects of a workforce shortage. And so the reason that independent living started to have higher satisfaction ratings than assisted living and skilled nursing, even though in the past they kind of mirrored each other, was that independent living didn't feel the workforce shortage crunch as much as skilled nursing did and as much as assisted living did, because your residents have a lot more interaction with the staff members. And so the data was kind of starting to tell a story that, as a matter of fact, satisfaction levels were dipping lower than they ever were during the pandemic. And the pandemic, as it wore on, it started to take a toll on residents and on family members, and it was very difficult. People were very scared. They couldn't come visit their loved ones. You guys know how difficult it was dealing with all the regulations and requirements, the PPE, dealing with all of that. What's interesting is that you see, even as those things started to end and phase out, you see the resident satisfaction levels actually were lower than during the pandemic. And that tells us a little bit of a story about how difficult the workforce shortage has been on our residents. And this next slide is actually an excerpt from one of the surveys we conducted for resident satisfaction. And one of the persons said, they keep telling me they're short on staff. Damn it, hire some more. The people didn't necessarily, your residents and their family members didn't necessarily understand the workforce shortage. They understood the pandemic, but you have to keep in mind the demographic of the people that are receiving care from you. Most of their lives, there has not been a workforce shortage. As a matter of fact, there's been a job shortage. And so there's always been enough workers and there hasn't been enough jobs. Now, for the first time in a lot of these people, this older generation's life, there are actually, more jobs available than there are people to fill them, and they don't necessarily understand that, and so they don't have the patience for it. And so one of the things that we like to explain is, from your position as a care provider and interacting with your residents and the families, you need to explain what's going on with the workforce shortage, that you're doing everything that you can to try to hire more, to try to retain your staff, to try to work on this workforce issue, but it is a pretty big issue. And so kind of dealing with, most businesses have kind of an ecology of how the business works. And that this flow, this circle that we have is the employees take care of the customers take care of the company, and then the company takes care of the employees. And anytime you have a hiccup in any one of these areas, you're going to see some issues. And so we have seen some problems over the last few years with this circle, but specifically one of the symptoms of this, if the employees aren't taking care of the customers, you might see higher customer churn. You're going to lose more customers. If the customers aren't taking care of the company, you're going to see the company's financials start to dip. And if the company's not taking care of the employees, you're going to see higher employee turnover. And so there's a lot of things that have happened in the last few years to influence this. And I'm not just going to say that we didn't take care of our employees well enough, but I will say that we're seeing some big increases in employee turnover. And that is usually a symptom of some difficult things happening. And so I know you guys are all feeling the pinch of the workforce crisis, and employee turnover is playing into that. There is some good news in this, and there are some interesting things that we can learn and some ways that we can adjust to this. So this next graph, it shows really when employees leave their jobs, and it's showing it by 100-day segments. And I think this is really interesting. We can learn a lot from this, but the axis across the bottom is grouped into segments of 100 days. And the axis up the left-hand side is telling us the percentage of total turnover when people are leaving their jobs. And so you can see that the first 100 days really jumps out. We're losing almost 40% of all turnover that's happening in skilled nursing is happening in the first 100 days. And if you focus on these first 100 days, that has a very high potential to impact your turnover. And so that's something that we want to focus on today. Something that I'm going to be talking about is what can you do to try to keep your staff during the first 100 days? Because in skilled nursing, that's where you experience the majority of turnover. So we did see a couple things happen, interestingly enough, during the pandemic, and that have had an effect on this. But I really have had an effect on a couple different numbers, and I'll get into that. But I really want this to stand out of, the first 100 days, how impactful that is on an employee, and how impactful that is on your workforce of keeping them through the first 100 days.
Hey, Chris, if you don't mind me jumping in here, we hear a lot about employee burnout being a challenge for operators. So I was just wondering, are you seeing that as well, or is it mostly new hires that are having the greatest turnover right now?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And, this data is showing that a lot of the new hires are having the problem. But of course, we hear from providers, we hear a lot of really interesting insight about what's going on with more tenured employees and their burnout levels. And there is some data to support that. So this is showing, when people leave their jobs in the by 100-day segment through about the first 4 years. But if we add another element to this chart, where we look at anyone who leaves their job who had a tenure over 1,500 days, so anyone who's been there over 4 years, you see an interesting change. So what this graph is showing is 2019 versus 2021. And so this the gray bar is 2019 and this green bar is 2021. And you can see, if you look at that very last piece of data, which is the 1,500 plus, you can see a pretty big increase from 2019 to 2021 in exits. So people that had a higher tenure, that had been there a long time, we saw a big increase in people who exited their job in 2021, if you look at that versus 2019 pre-pandemic. And so, Alex, you're exactly right. There has been a big increase in people experiencing burnout and leaving their job, leaving the sector, if you look at data from 2019 to 2021. But I will point out that if you look at this kind of represents these older tenured folks and employees experiencing burnout. This increase really doesn't hold a candle to what's going on in the first 100 days. So it's not a myth. You definitely are seeing people experiencing burnout and people leaving the job that have higher tenure, but that still does not make up or surpass what's happening in the first 100 days. And so that's something that is very, very important to focus on. There's some interesting data that American Healthcare put out earlier this year, and this shows how many employees there are in our sector, and the big dip that happened during the pandemic. So pre-pandemic, we were at about 1.6 million employees, and now we're down to 1.3 million employees. And so 237,000 people kind of left the sector in nursing homes during the pandemic. And so some of that has to do with staff burnout, but still a lot of that is happening in the first 100 days of employment. And so I've got some more stats here that are kind of interesting. If you look at people who were over 700 days of tenure, so that's about 2 years. In 2019, we lost about 113,000 of those in the sector. In 2021, that jumped up to 207,000. So these are people who have a little more tenure, and you can see a really big increase from 2019 to 2021. So that's kind of talking about some of those people experiencing burnout. But if you look at the people who had less than 100 days tenure, in 2019, we lost 300,000, around 300,000. In 2021, we lost almost 400,000 employees in the first 100 days. In 2019, we had about 750,000 total separations in the sector. In 2021, it went up to 1 million. So we're definitely seeing a big increase in turnover. We're seeing people leaving the sector. As we saw earlier, we saw 230,000 jobs that were lost during the pandemic. So this is a difficult thing. This isn't really, some of this news isn't new. We know that we're dealing with a turnover issue. But one of the things that we want to focus on is the first 100 days. You know, there's certain aspects, there's certain things that we're doing to help some of our longer tenured employees deal with burnout, but it's something that we really haven't seen a lot of employers implement strategies to try to keep people through the first 100 days. But we're telling you that if there's one thing that you can do to help with workforce issues right now, this is your biggest opportunity. You know, across the sector, we really need to reduce the amount of people that we're losing in the first 100 days. And so we do have some interesting strategies to help you do that. And I'll talk a little bit about those today. But a few more data points to help you understand this. We are dealing with a kind of a difficult issue of losing a lot of employees in the sector and having high turnover, but there is some good news. This graph on the left, this shows the US average for other industries of when they lose employees. And they do have a little bit of a peak in the first 3 months, the same way that we do in our sector. But then their biggest peak is at the year anniversaries and the first year anniversary and the second year anniversary. And then once they're there 2 years, you see a huge decrease in employee turnover. And so, you know, I have a friend who works in a different sector. He works in finance, and in their organization, they have a strategy to try to keep their employees through the first 2 years, because they know that if they can keep someone through the first 2 years, that their chance of turnover goes way, way down. So they have some initiatives, they have different things that they do to try to keep their employees with them through the first 2 years, because they understand the data. But the data for long-term care is very different. You see the huge spike right out of the gate, and then it goes way down. And so the good news for us is we can kind of have some of those same initiatives, but we don't have to keep them for 2 years. We just need to keep our employees through the first 100 days. If we can keep them through the first 3 months, that their chance of turnover starts to go way, way, way down. And so, you know, there's a lot of reasons for this. You know, the first 100 days, maybe they're learning a new EHR system. There's a lot of new adjustments that need to be they have to learn. It's a difficult job to adjust to, but the good news is the data shows that if they can adjust to it in the first 3 months, they usually will stick around. And so this kind of shows the importance of focusing on that first 3 months, focusing on the first 100 days, getting your employees to stick with you through that very difficult time and through that high risk time of losing an employee. And then once you get past that, their chance of sticking around goes up exponentially. And so we are dealing with this problem, and the pandemic, you know, has impacted it and made it worse. But I will say that this is not a new problem. This was not created during the pandemic. This problem existed pre-pandemic. Pre-pandemic, we were losing about 30% of new hires before day 100. And that was a pretty big number. You know, almost 1 in 3 we were losing. Once the pandemic started, that number went up to almost 40%. So we're losing 4 out of 10 new hires before day 100. And so it's something that definitely needs attention. We want to really focus on keeping our staff through the first 100 days. You know, one of the things, I've been to a lot of different sessions and I've been to a lot of education about what we can do to help with workforce issue. And one of the things that always comes up is pay. And I know each of you probably have a strategy to increase your pay. You're having to deal with staffing agencies coming in and paying a lot higher wages, and then, you know, essentially renting your employees back to you. They're stealing employees, renting them back to you. You've got to deal with hospitals. Other sectors are increasing their pay. And so pay is definitely important. But I will say that when you look at it through this spectrum, if you look at our turnover problem as a new hire turnover issue, pay is not as impactful on new hires, because those new hires agreed to that pay. You know, those people who are leaving in the first 100 days, that typically is not a pay issue, because they knew what the pay was going in. Sometimes they could be getting recruited somewhere else that has higher pay, and you could see some people being affected by pay in the first 100 days. But generally, new hire turnover has to do with other issues besides the pay levels, simply because they knew what the pay levels were going in, and they agreed to it. It would work for them. So I want you to think about this of, how do we fix this problem? And the solution to fixing some of these turnover issues is, let's put some strategies together to keep our staff with us for through the first 100 days. So the rest of my presentation today, I want to talk a little bit about 5 strategies that you can employ to keep your people with you through the first 100 days. The reason that's important, and I'm going to keep reiterating this, is because once you get past that first 100 days, their chance of turnover goes way down, and their likeliness of staying with you goes up. And I saw a really interesting, just a brand new study that came out. It was for assisted living, and it talked about, it correlated staff tenure to resident length of stay. And it said staff tenure is the biggest influencer of resident length of stay in assisted living. Now, I haven't seen any data like that for skilled nursing, but I suspect it's very similar. I suspect you're going to see a very strong correlation between staff tenure and long-term care length of stay, because those things are highly correlated. As a matter of fact, Mark Parkinson, the head of American Healthcare Association, he's told me several times the number one thing he tells providers to do is focus on their employee satisfaction, because he knows that your employees, how they affect the caregiving and how they affect your residents. And so what we're doing is we're kind of boiling this down one step further to say the number one thing that you can do to impact your staff tenure is to keep them through those first 100 days. Because once they're past that first 100 days, the chance, you know, their tenure numbers will go up, because those are the first most critical times of employment, and that's when turnover is the highest. So not only is this, I think, one of the most important strategies to help with your workforce issues, this is also going to be correlated to your patient outcomes, your resident outcomes, your resident length of stay for your long-term residents. To me, this is really one of the most important things that you can do to have an impact on your overall business. That graph I showed earlier, or that circle I showed earlier, of how the employees take care of the residents, residents take care of the business takes care of the employees. This is how you affect that, by taking care of your staff, helping them stay through the first 100 days, that difficult time. Is going to have a big impact on your overall, on the outcomes for your residents, on your financial outcomes, on all sorts of things. So how are we going to do this? So these are the 5 strategies that we recommend to keep your residents through the first, or excuse me, to keep your staff through the first 100 days. The first thing that you need to do is create a 100-day strategy. And so I'm going to jump in and talk about that. So this step seems kind of obvious, but you'd be surprised how many people skip this and just start implementing other things. One of the things that I tell people is you have to create a strategy for this. You have to have a plan. You have to start measuring how you're doing on this. So one of the things that we recommend is that any new employee that onboards with you, you need to set expectations about the first 100 days. You need to let them know that the first 100 days will be the most challenging during their stay with you. And if they can get through those first 100 days, the job becomes a lot more enjoyable. Their chance of wanting to leave goes way down. They're going to really get comfortable and enjoy what they're doing. And so you are here to help kind of usher them through those first 100 days because they can be challenging. And so you need to set those expectations with them because they are going to hit some road bumps in their first 3 months with you. And you want them to understand that that's natural, that's normal, that that happens to people, and that you're there for them when those things happen. The second thing we recommend people do is that you start measuring how many of your employees are staying through the first 100 days. To me, this should be one of the KPIs of your business, that you're looking at, okay, of every employee that we hire, how many of them make it to the first 100 days? And once you start measuring that, then you need to set some goals in the future to increase your 100-day retention. This should be a very important measure in your business of how many of your new employees are making it to day 100. And as a matter of fact, we think you need to assign a team leader to oversee this initiative. So somebody needs to own this KPI. Somebody needs to own this part. It makes sense for someone in HR to do that. Some of you may not have as many HR resources, so it has to be somebody in operations or somebody even at the caregiving level who's overseeing some of the onboarding, that there's a team leader who oversees this initiative to get people to stay with you during the first 100 days. So this is the first recommendation that we have, is you need to create a strategy of what you're going to do. And then you need to measure how you're doing and have somebody oversee this and have it be a KPI. Okay, so then next, one of the strategies that you can deploy in your 100-day plan is to focus on onboarding and training. So no day is more stressful than your first day and at a new job, and you need to make sure that you are onboarding and training properly. We do employee satisfaction surveys, so where we will check in with employees, we check in with new hires to see how they're doing. And the number one question that we ask that is correlated with employee tenure is we ask them to rate the training that they received when they were first onboarded. And so just by understanding how people rate the training they received, we can correlate that to how long they're going to stay with an employer. The better the training, the higher that they rate it, the higher the tenure of that employee group. The lower they rate it, the lower their tenure is going to be. So training is really, really important. One of the things that we're seeing right now is, because there's a workforce shortage and because we're so desperate to get people out on the floor, some of onboarding and training is getting bypassed in order to rush them out to take care of the residents. And that's a really difficult situation because it creates kind of a vicious cycle. We know that you have to get those people out on the floor, and because your residents have to get taken care of, but you have to make sure that's not coming at the expense of your onboarding and training process. Even if they're getting out and pushed out onto the floor, make sure they're getting enough onboarding and training, because if they don't get onboarded and trained properly, you're going to lose them. And so this is really important to establish a really proper onboarding training process. One of the things that we definitely encourage you to do is evaluate the training process. Ask your new hires that go through it how they would rate it, what things that they would recommend improved, what things they felt like they weren't prepared for, what things they felt they were really prepared for. Your new hires will tell you this stuff if you take a second and ask them how things are going. So employees are 23% more likely to stay if their manager clearly explains their roles and responsibilities. So onboarding and training, very, very important for your new hires, getting them to day 100. A lot of it depends on how well they're onboarded and they're trained. Okay, the second thing that we recommend is to have a systematic feedback process. And so what does that mean? That means that you are checking in at certain milestones, and it's systematic, that it's happening it's happening to everybody, and it's regular. So what we typically recommend, what we do with our software process is we check in at day 15, we check in at day 30, we check in at day 60, and we check in at day 90. And so we definitely recommend that you check in with your new hires systematically to each one of those to ask how they're doing. It's really important. It doesn't have to be very formal. With your new hires, just to check in, how are things going? How's your job going? Do you need anything right now to be better at your job? That's a really great question that gives you insight into each individual employee that gets back to you of what they specifically need. One of the things that we've learned from surveying so many different new hires in this sector is everybody's a little bit different. We can't point to just one thing that if you just do this one thing, it magically affects everybody for the positive. Onboarding and training actually might be that one thing. It's pretty close, but the rest of them have, they say different things. They'll say, I'm working PRN at this other place and it's kind of difficult. I wish that I could go full-time here. Or they'll say, I'm working the night shift and I really would rather be working the day shift on these days, or I have to take my kids to their appointments at these times, so I never can work these times, even though those are the best shifts, and I wish there was something else someone could do for me. I'm having a hard time learning this new EMR. I'm not getting it. I don't know what to do, or I'm having a hard time with the equipment that we have. Everyone has a different type of problem that they need help with. And so by checking in with them systematically and asking if they need anything to be better at their job right now, it really helps you solve some of those individual processes. But one of the really interesting things that we've learned by doing the systematic feedback, by checking in with your new hires regularly, is that new hires who respond to a check-in survey during those first 100 days, they're 50% more likely to make it to the 100-day mark. So these new hire check-in surveys are very important because they help people get adjusted. They also tell you what you can do as a leader and as their manager to help them get through that 100-day mark. The other thing is it gives you some idea of who's going to make it. Because if you're giving people surveys and they're skipping all of them, that gives you a pretty good idea that they may not be invested and they may not make it to the first 100 days. So really kind of an interesting stat that if someone responds to a new hire survey, they're 50% more likely to make it to that 100-day mark. So the next thing that you can do is employee recognition. And you guys have heard this before in the past of how important employee recognition is, but even your employees in their first 100 days, a lot of our clients and a lot of operators have strategies in place to give recognition to people that have been there a while. When someone hits their year anniversary or any anniversary, you do a little celebration for them, or you have a party or whatever. If someone does a good job, we're recognizing them. What we would challenge you to do is look for ways to recognize people who are your new hires. Recognize them once they make it through the training and onboarding process. That's a difficult time. As they hit different milestones, celebrate it. The thing that we're trying to do is the one thing we're trying to accomplish through all this is get your new hires to stay with you through the first 100 days. So once somebody hits the 100-day milestone, you need to celebrate that. You need to let them know that you really appreciate them. That was probably the hardest time of their employment with you, and they've gotten through it and they did a great job, and we really appreciate it. So look for ways to give them recognition. We've seen different systematic recognition programs that have been pretty successful. We saw one that I thought was really cool, that one of our clients had different color bracelets. And if you get recognized by a resident for going above and beyond, or a family member, you would get like a purple bracelet. And once you had 5 of those purple bracelets, you could you could trade it in for like $100 gift card. But they had different colors for different things, different things like that. And once you were recognized 5 times, they give you a $100 gift card. But what this client ended up seeing is that nobody was trading in their bracelets. Even though they could get the $100 gift card, they weren't trading in their bracelets because the employees liked wearing them as kind of a badge of honor. And so, the other employees started to see who's had a lot of these bracelets, and it became kind of a cool way to do this systematic recognition program. And as a matter of fact, getting recognized and wearing that on their wrist was actually more important to them than getting money from the organization. So earlier we talked about pay and how we're trying to do lots of things to increase pay, and that seems to be a big problem. But we're telling you from the data we see, pay is not everything. These recognition is sometimes more important than pay. And so don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that inflation isn't happening and pay isn't increasing, because it definitely is, and you have to have strategies to deal with that, but it's not everything. And if you think the solution to your workforce problems is to pay more, I promise you that's not the solution. It's part of the puzzle, it's part of the story, but there's other things that you also need to do. Recognition is a really important part of this. Employees are 2 times more likely to be looking for a new job if they don't feel recognized for good work. Okay, so these are some strategies. These are some things that you can implement right now out of the gate to help keep your employees through the first 100 days. This last strategy that I'm going to talk about really is a cultural change, and it takes a little more time, and it's going to affect all of your employees. It's not going to just affect the new hires, but it will affect them also, and I think it's really important. And the last one is creating a culture of love. What does that mean? In 2014, Sigal Barsade and Olivia O'Neill from Wharton University published a story called What's Love Got to Do with It? It's a longitudinal study of the culture of companionate love and employee and client outcomes in long-term care setting. Okay, that's a mouthful, but they did this really interesting study where they looked at skilled nursing facilities, and they looked at their culture and how having a culture of what they called companionate love in that culture, how it affected outcomes for residents and how it affected employees. So what's companionate love? Companionate love is something different than romantic love. And companionate love is defined as warmth, affection, and connection. And so in this study, they looked at facilities, caregivers who were skilled nursing providers who had high levels of warmth, affection between the employees, and connection amongst the employees. And they looked at how it affected outcomes. And the study was really, really interesting. One of the things that I will point out is this isn't just our sector who's going through this. Most sectors are starting to awaken of the importance of human connection and emotion in the workplace. I was listening to a podcast by Brene Brown the other day, and I'm sure a lot of you have listened to her and read some of her stuff, and it's really important. It's really important and it's really interesting. In her podcast, she said, "We used to think of ourselves as rational beings who on occasion felt, and now we're really seeing that ourselves as feeling creatures who on occasion reason." And that has been a big shift in the workplace and in any of the thought leadership that's been happening over the last 10 years, is understanding that we are feeling creatures who on occasion reason. And you have to create a culture in your workplace that caters to that, that we understand that we don't leave our humanity at the door when we walk into work. And I think in healthcare, we have a big advantage over other sectors because of the nature of our work. What is the nature of our work is we are caring for others. In a skilled nursing setting, what are we doing? We're providing care to our residents. We're providing something that's very important to them. And I know a lot of you focus on the type of care that we provide. And so what we're saying to do, what this study is saying to do, is that same type of care and the same type of love and emotion and connection and support that you give to your residents, you need to make sure the employees are receiving that also. And because it has very high correlations to resident outcomes and to engaged employees and happy employees. This is a quote from the study. Employees who felt they worked in a loving, caring culture reported higher levels of satisfaction and teamwork. They showed up to work more often. How nice would that be? How big of an issue is that? Is when people miss their shifts, they call out, and you've got to find someone last minute to fill a shift. People who work in these cultures show up to work more often. Our research also demonstrated this type of culture related directly to client outcomes, including improved patient mood, quality of life, satisfaction, fewer trips to the ER. How important is that? And this is all correlated to this type of culture that's a caring, loving culture of companionate love. So what does a culture of companionate love look like? Imagine a pair of coworkers collaborating side by side, each day expressing caring and affection towards one another, safeguarding each other's feelings, showing tenderness and compassion when things don't go well. Now imagine a workplace that encourages those behaviors from everyone, where managers actively look for ways to create and reinforce close workplace relationship among employees. And so one of the things that I'll point out about this is this is not something that you can just wave a wand and do. This is not something that even the managers can implement strategies to do. This is something that takes time. You have to start with some type of strategy. I guess I shouldn't say strategies, some kind of tactics that you can just do. You have to purposefully try to cultivate this. You have to create a culture where this is encouraged and accepted, where create a culture where employees have this type of relationship amongst themselves. And so think about this as you're working on your culture, as you're laying out plans of how you can improve culture. This is very important. So what does a culture of love work look like? I talked about the last slide. It's got some suggestions. Some things that you can do is you can focus on the emotional aspect of work. Instead of always just focusing on outcomes and hitting certain KPIs, focus on the emotional part of work. Broaden the definition of culture. There's certain interfacing emotions that you can focus on. Those are things like pride and joy. And then there are other facing emotions like love and caring. How are the employees interacting? Those interfacing emotions are important too. If someone is proud to work, one of the questions that we ask in one of our surveys is, are you proud to work for this organization? That's a pretty high indicator of how engaged that employee is. If they're proud to work for you, if they're feeling that type of an emotion, the chances of them being a highly engaged employee are very high. Be aware of what type of emotions you're expressing to employees. What type of what is important? What are the things that you're expressing to the employees? Have policies that foster this type of companionate love. Look for ways to create moments between employees. Are you allowing them to get together to have these types of experiences that are important? I think in our setting, in a skilled nursing setting, we really have an advantage on this because we can create moments that happen like this. You see nurses working together at nursing stations, having special connection between each other. This is a really important thing that you guys can do to help with. We talked about burnout. This will help reduce burnout. This will help keep people through the first 100 days. And so I think this is worth mentioning. I really like talking about this topic because I think it's really important to take care of the people that we have that are taking care of our residents. And this is one of the things that you can do to take care of them. So in conclusion, one of the things that, or not one of the things, the main thing I've talked about today is let's keep our staff with us through the first 100 days. Create a strategy to do that. Implement your plan of how you're going to keep people with you through your first 100 days. Because if you can keep your staff through the first 100 days, your turnover issues are going to dramatically improve, and that's going to dramatically help your workforce issues. We know there's we know it's difficult. We know there's not a lot of pool of people of talent to hire from. During the pandemic, we had tons and tons of boomers retire early. And so we do have just a smaller workforce right now. And so keeping the people that you have, hiring is an investment. And this is protecting your investment. Keeping the people you have is very, very important. And the best strategy that you can deploy to keep the people you have is to keep your staff through the first 100 days. So that's really the end of the slides of everything I wanted to present, but I'm happy to answer any questions we have here at the end. I really appreciate everyone being on today, and I know this takes a little of your time, and we really appreciate that. So Alex, any questions come in, or do you have anything you would like to ask?
Yeah, thanks so much, Chris, for such an illustrative presentation. I think you brought up a lot of interesting data points on employee turnover to give folks a lot of things to think about moving forward. So we did get a couple questions from the audience over the course of the presentation, and I want to invite anyone with additional questions into them in the Q&A chat. We'll try to get to them before the end. So one thing that did come up is whether or not the presentations will be made available online afterwards. And Pinnacle Quality Insight will share the slides via email following the event, and the recording session will be posted to the event site to view at your convenience for 30 days. So now on to questions. Why do you think long-term care employees are so likely to leave at the beginning of their jobs?
Yeah, that's a good question. And from some of the data that we've gathered and some of the, we do exit surveys also, so we can look at some of those exit surveys. I think the main thing is there's a huge adjustment period, and it can be difficult to adjust to that. Every time if it's someone's first time in the sector, that's a huge adjustment. But even if it's not their first time in the sector, just going from location A to location B, there's a lot of different systems. There's a lot of different, a lot of training that you have to go through. Sometimes, I talked a little bit about onboarding and training not being sufficient. One of the things that we've seen for a long time is that we are so hungry to get workers out on the floor taking care of residents that they don't get properly onboarded and trained. And so then you've got to learn a new EMR, you've got to learn the different policies, and there's big time adjustments just to the job. I mean, as you guys know, these are not easy jobs. People have these jobs for a reason, and it's not that this is just the easiest way that they can make this wage. People usually choose these jobs because they care about others and they're passionate about providing care, and they're doing it because it fulfills something inside of them. But when rubber hits the road, the difficulty of doing that is sometimes overwhelming, and we think that's really one of the main reasons.
No, that makes a ton of sense. So another thing that came in, how do we convince the managers, supervisors, higher ups to really buy into this retention strategy? One of the audience members says that oftentimes they see that managers are not ready to discuss retention. In their mind, it is a pay scale and now mandated by vaccination policy.
Yeah, I think the best thing, that's a really good question. First of all, I love that question because you have to have buy-off from everybody. And, at the end of the day, this is a business. This is still a business, and you have to make money. And I think one of the best ways to get manager buy-off in this is pitching ROI. And it costs, every time you hire anytime you hire someone in this sector, the average cost to hire that person is $4,000. When you look at the training costs, when you look at the cost of acquiring that employee and finding that employee, every time you lose somebody, you're losing $4,000. And every time you hire someone, it's costing $4,000. That's kind of a low end of the estimation. Some people's hiring costs might be more than that. So if you look at that, and an average facility loses about 72 employees a year, 72 times 4,000 is a big chunk of money. And so if you can employ a strategy that maybe is only costing a couple $1,000s, and you're able to reduce your average amount of turnover you have from losing 72 employees down to 50 employees, well, what's 4,000 times 20? That's going to output an $80,000 savings for the business. And so sometimes getting manager buy-in on this stuff just comes down to dollars and cents. Is, look, this will help everybody. This is going to alleviate some of the problems that we're having with getting, having to pay agency. Talk to them about agency. Everyone hates having to have agency because it's so expensive. If you can not have agency, if you can not have to worry about filling shifts, and you can save money, the financial ROI is enough to usually get the attention of most managers. If it's not getting the attention of your manager, I promise you it'll get the attention of the manager that person reports to, because they're going to be looking at the dollars.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I think some of those turnover expenses can really start to add up once you're seeing, a lot of it. So what kind of things should you ask when you're looking for feedback from new hires, you think?
Yeah, I showed a slide that kind of showed some of the things that we talk about, that we ask. To me, the most important things are, how are you doing when you're, when you're checking in with your new hires? How's your job going? It can be very, very simple. Do you need anything to be better at your job right now? That was one of the questions that we showed. That will give you a lot of insight. You want to ask them if they would recommend employment to others there. You're going to want to ask them how training and onboarding went and how it's going. And, those 4 things are very critical to ask. There's some other things that we think is important to ask, but if you're creating a process on your own, I would probably stick to those 4 things of asking each of your new hires. Again, if you'd recommend employment, if they need anything to be better at their job, how training and onboarding went, and then just overall, how's their job going?
No, absolutely. I think those are great tips. So similarly, we got a question on do you have a sample survey that you feel really puts the finger on long-term care culture or other conditions that you could share or recommend? Or is there anything really in exit surveys that you find really should be asked or need to be addressed?
Yeah, that's a good question. We have a lot of data that we publish. You could head over to our website. There's a lot of different things published. If I could just point to one thing, gosh, I don't know if I could just point to one thing. If honestly, of all the takeaway I talked today, keeping your people through the first 100 days and communicating to them of how difficult those first 100 days are is the most impactful thing you can do. If you focus on training, if you check in with them, if you give them employee recognition, you create a plan of how you're going to keep your people through the first 100 days. That's really the most impactful thing. There's lots of other things that we have learned and have published. You can find some of that on our website, but I don't know if I could point to one thing besides some of the stuff I've talked about today.
Oh, absolutely. So often the managers, the administrators are leading an environment right now that has normalized this high turnover and work-related turnover. So do you feel that there is a secret to breaking through this kind of normalization and its impact and seeking solutions?
Yeah, I do. And I think that I really like that question and how it's stated, because a lot of people have just almost surrendered. It's like, well, this is the way it is. And I'm telling you, we have worked with organizations that are not like that. I'm thinking specifically of one that we work with in Maine who has their turnover very low, and they expect employees to make it. That, some of it is just changing your expectations and how you approach the problem and being aware of the problem. Put a strategy in place that, no, we expect our people to make it through the first 100 days because we're going to help them through it. You can't just decide one day that it's going to be that way. You have to put a strategy in place. But if you do it, I promise it can work. And we're telling you the easiest way to reduce this high turnover atmosphere is to focus on the first 100 days. Talk to those people, ferry them through that difficult time, and you can change the culture. This doesn't have to be a high turnover atmosphere. There are care providers that are out there where it is not a high turnover atmosphere. Yeah, you're going to lose employees. Everybody loses employees, but not at the rate we're losing them.
No, absolutely. I think the last year has really shown us that the workforce issues aren't just going to go away because you wish them to, and really need to have like more of a global panoramic view of what's going on and how you can fix it. So do you do any trainings for supervisors, leadership trainings? Kind of how does Pinnacle help out with that sort of stuff?
Yeah, most of what we provide is the software. We make our software very intuitive, so the users can, the residents and the family members are telling the story, and the staff members are telling the story. So when we're checking with staff members, they're kind of telling them what to do, and they're following up on that. So we do some training for our clients. We do some trainings in different atmospheres, maybe something like this or different things, but mostly what we're providing is the technology that caregivers can use to try to get through some of these problems. So we don't have a lot of training that we do outside of maybe some webinars like this with organizations like you guys.
No, I gotcha. So we have, a little less than 5 minutes left. So anybody have any additional questions, please submit them and we'll try to get through this. So you mentioned the tech that you guys have. One question we got is does it work with ADP payroll?
Yeah, actually it does. We can tie into ADP payroll. Most payroll providers have some type of API we can connect to. And if they don't have an API we can connect to, we can get a data feed or something, but we really haven't had any problems connecting to payroll or HR systems, but ADP is one of them we've connected to in the past. So definitely works with that one.
It's great to hear. So can you elaborate on finding the balance between expediting onboarding due to staffing shortages versus taking time to train staff on the front end? And, it feels like a really difficult decision for operators right now, especially with so many of them having to close down units due to staffing shortages and really feeling the brunt of these shortages right now.
That's an excellent question, and it's really tough to answer because it is chicken and the egg kind of situation, and it is kind of a vicious cycle. But I would tell you, I'll just point to the data, and the data says if people don't feel that they're trained well, they have a lower tenure and you're going to lose them. And so I would say to err on the side of not getting them on the floor. And I know that's a scary, difficult situation. But if you can make sure that they have enough training and onboarding, that's going to pay dividends in the long run, where you're not going to keep having these issues. It's almost like if you just bite the bullet and do it, it's compound interest, and you're going to see over time the benefits. So I would say, it's hard because you don't want to shut down a wing because you can't, you don't have enough employees. But I'm telling you, if you're putting people out there without enough training, you're going to lose them, and you're going to have to replace those people in a few months. And so I would err on the side of the problem of overtraining them, even if that means working short.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really tough call. So
really tough call.
Thanks for answering that so thoughtfully. We have about 1 minute left, but any suggestions to address generation gaps like baby boomer supervisors and Gen Z new hires?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the generations are pretty different. I don't think I can give any, I don't think in 1 minute I can say this is what we should do for Gen Z and millennials and boomers. But I will say that in our software product, you can look at satisfaction data for each generation, and it is a little bit different, and they want different things. So what I would say with that is, don't just group people into generations. look at them individually. We talked about that question. What do you need to be better at your job right now? Try to get managers to understand their employees on an individual level and can solve their specific needs. Yeah, Gen Z is going to have one set of needs. Millennials want, they want to have purpose and different things, but each individual is a different person. And so I don't think I can just give one, say this is how you should treat Gen Z and millennials and the boomers, but I definitely think understanding their generation and understanding your employees individually is very important. And that's a good question. I really like that question. I wish I was better prepared to answer it with some a few things that are specific to each generation.
Yeah, no, I think I thought it was really an interesting way to look at it as well.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
certainly not something that I don't think there's one right answer for either. So, well, that's all the time we have today, but thank you so much, Chris, and the audience for joining us today. And thanks to Pinnacle for bringing us this insightful conversation. I hope it was helpful.
Yeah, I hope so too. Thanks for joining, everybody. And thanks, Alex, for moderating. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.